rush is on. How are you all? All good? Excellent. Good. Gordo? All good. Well, good morning. Jared Blay, Deputy Leader and also Shadow Minister for Infrastructure in Queensland, joined by Steve Minikins, Shadow Minister for Transport and Main Roads. Well, it's another day in Queensland, and it's another day Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk is hiding from the Queensland media gallery, not answering the big questions and the questions that matter to not only the media gallery but also to Queenslanders. The youth crime crisis, the homelessness issue, the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis we've got in Queensland. The Premier yesterday made a big announcement about trains, but her big announcement is a big bombshell, and here's why. On the government's own record, on the government's own promise about Cross River Rail, where they said it's due to open in 2025, which is a year later than they promised. 2025 is the now date for delivery of Cross River Rail. They said they would need 20 new trains manufactured in Queensland, and that was their big announcement. So 20 new trains needed for the Cross River Rail. And we find out now that these trains won't be delivered till after Cross River Rail opens. Ladies and gentlemen, they forgot to order the trains. They forgot to order the trains. They dug the tunnel, they're putting the line down, but no one in the Queensland Labor government remembered to order the trains. We would say to Anastasia Palaszczuk and to Mark Bailey that when you build a rail line and you expect Queenslanders and passengers to catch a train is a pretty important part of that commitment. So they promised new trains. They said 20 new trains were needed for the Cross River Rail, and now we find out these new trains that they announced yesterday won't be delivered till after Cross River Rail opens. Like, seriously, what have we got to in Queensland now where the Transport Minister forgot to press a button, forgot to press go on the order of the trains for the Cross River Rail? Now, these questions should be put to Anastasia Palaszczuk, but again, she's hiding. And I want to give you a compare and contrast here. Every team, every company in Queensland, every good company, every good team needs to get their team together. We do it in the Liberal National Party. We get our team together once a year. You talk about the issues that matter. And we did this, the LNP, we did this last week in Redcliffe. We door-knocked Redcliffe. We spoke to paramedics, we spoke to residents, we spoke to business people, community leaders for 2 days. We had shadow cabinet in Redcliffe. Then we door-knocked Redcliffe. So the people of Redcliffe, we showed our commitment to the people of Redcliffe and highlighted they have not only a dud member in Yvette Darth, but also a dud health minister in Yvette Darth. We were there on the ground talking to the people and also door-knocking. In contrast, Anastasia Palaszczuk is taking her team to Fraser Island today. Now, I love Fraser. I've holidayed at Fraser. I'd encourage people to go to Fraser. But Anastasia has really got to answer this question. When you've got people in Queensland who can't get a rental, who can't put a roof over their head, you look at the homelessness issue right around Queensland, you look at people being broken into, having their cars stolen, tradies not being able to go to work because their tools have been stolen out the back of the utes, you have to ask yourself the question, is a love-in, a political love-in at Fraser Island, when all these crises are happening, the best use of the ministers and the members of the Labor Party time? And I'd say no. So whilst Queenslanders are suffering a youth crime crisis, Anastasia Palaszczuk and her members and her ministry will be drinking cocktails at Fraser Island. Well, seriously, is that how the real world works? So they'll be up at Fraser Island in the next 2 days drinking cocktails while Queenslanders continue to get their homes broken into, suffering the consequences of a youth crime crisis, a homelessness issue, a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis. And our Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, has chosen to take her team to live it up on Fraser Island. And not only that, we understand, no media. have been invited to attend to see what they're doing. The Queensland Media Gallery kept out of the loop on anything they're going to be doing. Well, I understand why, I guess. The ministers don't want to be caught drinking cocktails at Fraser Island while we're all in real world talking about the youth crime crisis, the housing crisis and the cost of living crisis. This Premier has checked out. This Premier is not interested in governing anymore. This Premier and her team are only interested in the high life. And today that's at Fraser Island in a luxury resort drinking cocktails while the rest of Queensland suffers under a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis and a youth crime crisis. Steve.
Oops, we forgot to order the trains. The whole purpose of Cross River Rail was to have more trains running more frequently. Well, you can't be running more frequently if you forget the trains. Seriously, you could not make this up. It's like something out of Holloman. Here is the signature $8 billion and rising Cross River Rail project, which is a year late, but it even gets worse. Somewhere along the way, the incompetent Minister for Transport and Main Roads, Mark Bailey, forgot to order the trains on time. So Queenslanders are going to be having, with much fanfare no doubt, the opening of a bright new set of train stations, but oops, there won't be the trains running through as promised. This is a bit like a kid getting a Hornby train set on Christmas morning, and they busily put the track together. There's the oval, powered up next to the transformer. Then they turn to mum and dad and go, "Where's the trains?" You seriously cannot make this up. But it's incredible when you think that, and it's written here, that they were going to order 20 train car sets specifically for Cross River Rail. And who made that announcement here in black and white? Minister Mark Bailey. This is incredible. Minister Mark Bailey is at war with himself. It must make for interesting viewing in the mirror. Because on the one hand, he is saying that we're going to have 20 more train sets specifically for Cross River Rail. Yep, it'll all be on time, tickety-boo, nothing to see here. But when you get to the detail, completely failed. This is a minister who has presided over some of the biggest budget blowouts in Queensland infrastructure history. Cross River Rail, $8 billion and rising. We've got Gold Coast Light Rail Stage 3A that blew out by hundreds of millions of dollars. We've got the second M1, the Coomera Connector, which has hardly even started, and another failure. But I have to say, of all the budget blowouts and failures under Minister Mark Bailey's watch, this one has got to take the cake. Oops, I forgot to order the trains. This is a minister who has a proven track record on sending out about 24,000 tweets. We all know he was called foolish by the CCC because of the deletion of over 30,000 private emails. If someone is seriously a Minister of the Crown and is emailing privately that profusely and doing tweets, no wonder he cannot get on top of his ministerial brief, which is to actually bring infrastructure in time and on budget. But seriously, to have an infrastructure project as significant as Cross River Rail and to forget the trains, this is like something out of a bad episode of Faulty Towers.
The Minister said he'll have plenty of trains to run on Cross River Rail. Do you think Queenslanders really care if there's a new one or not?
I don't think Queenslanders trust Mark Bailey or trust the government to deliver this infrastructure anymore, reliably or on time or on budget, I might add. As Steve Minikin said, you've seen the budget blowouts. I also saw what the Minister said in terms of that, and he said that, well, they don't all have to operate from go. They'll sort of be transitioned and start, here and there. Well, the reality is that they promised a service. The service, the Cross River Rail, is already a year, it will be a year out of date because they promised it would open by 2024. It's blown out by nearly $3 billion. The Cross River Rail blowout is nearly $3 billion. You would expect, and I think Queenslanders, any reasonable person would expect that if the government's spending about $8 billion on a project, it would open and full services would be available. And that's clearly not going to happen now. So I don't think Mark Bailey, whether it's a train here or a train there, it's a new train, an old train, the reality is I don't think it'll have the full services, which he admitted this morning, which I think Queenslanders would have expected for an $8 billion project.
Do you think it really looks like
Queenslanders, if it is running on time, I guess most people, it's safe to say, we look at, the building industry at the moment, the manufacturing industry, and things are always generally delayed. Do you think people genuinely care though?
I think, Brendan, they do genuinely care because a promise was made, and a promise was made, a promise should be kept. That document that you're holding was in 2020. That was their election commitment. And they said that the trains would be built in Queensland, up to 60 trains, 20 would be needed for Cross River Rail. What have they been doing for the last 2 years? They should have been onto this. Now, the manufacturing, and you use the building examples and so forth, supplies or whatever, that's the case. But the reality is they only made the announcement yesterday. So what have they been doing for the last 2 years to ensure that when Cross River Rail opens, it opens with full capacity? And I just don't trust Mark Bailey. I don't trust him. And that's just not me as an opponent in a different political party saying that. That is based on his record. The Coomera Connector, the Cross River Rail. Everything he touches blows out. Everything he touches is delayed. Everything he touches is not on time and not on budget. So that's just the reality of the situation. It's a bad minister, it's a bad government, and to tell you the truth, I'm not surprised when I see they forgot to order the trains required for a full service Cross River Rail. I'm just not surprised. I would have thought a promise was made for all these services. Cross River Rail, $8 billion. Queenslanders would expect you go down there and what was promised is delivered, and that's not going to be the case now.
Why do you think it took so long to get to the point where they could announce Downer as the first supplier?
Well, that's a good question for the Premier, and I'd love you to be able to ask her that, Joel, if she wasn't sipping cocktails at Fraser Island. But I understand you haven't got an invite to join her in cocktail sipping at Fraser Island. Unfortunately, she's again hiding from the Queensland Media Gallery. That's a great question for the Premier, and I'd love to hear her answer that once she gets back from Fraser Island after she's just gone to Paris for 5 weeks and so forth. Oh, well, look, certainly if they had have done it when they said they were going to do it 2 years ago and been onto this, the cost would have been cheaper, no doubt, because, as was rightfully pointed out, things and materials and supplies have increased in cost. But this is just, look, you could apply it, Rachel, to anything. You could apply it to Cross River Rail, the Coomera Connector, road projects on the Sunshine Coast, the Bruce Highway. Everything Mark Bailey touches turns to custard. Everything he touches blows out. Everything he touches is not on budget and not on time. He has done over 25,000 tweets. He deleted 30,000 emails. Imagine if Mark Bailey spent less time on Twitter and actually doing his job as Transport and Main Roads Minister. Imagine he might have remembered to send the invoice or pay the invoice for the train delivery or announce the tender earlier. Who knows? But this is a situation we've got in, and that's because the ministers are just not interested anymore. The Premier's given up on governing. She's not interested in the job. She's more interested in red carpets, glitz, glamour, Fraser Island, France, Aperol in Italy, whatever the case is. She is not interested in Queenslanders anymore. Huge concerns, and that's why when all of this integrity issue started, we called for a royal commission into the integrity in the Palaszczuk government and included ANACTA, because you'll rightfully point out, Joel, that ANACTA was a client, or Downer was a client of ANACTA. And was it any great surprise yesterday when the Premier announces that she's taking her cabinet to Maryborough? They're going to make an announcement at Downer. Is it any surprise that Downer had actually won the tender? Remember, this document that we released in 2020, their election commitment, they made that election commitment at Downer. So they said, we're going to have an independent tender process with Downer trains in the background. Imagine if you're another company thinking, am I really going to get a fair go in this tender process? So, to answer your question, what we've said is there should have been a royal commission into integrity, and that would we would certainly do it. And that will include ANACTA, the Labor lobbying, the Labor deals, and the CFMEU, and their relationship with the government that the government thinks is not a cosy relationship, and the CFMEU get no benefit out of a Labor government being in power, for goodness sake.
So the LNP attacked Mark Bailey's attacked the LNP about the LNP record office. What do you think is the biggest stuff up here? Ordering trains that have come a year late, or ordering trains that are non-disability compliant?
Well, I think not ordering trains at all would be the highlight in all of this. The reality is Palaszczuk has been the Premier for 8 years. Cross River Rail was their signature infrastructure project. This was Jackie Trad's infrastructure project. So much so that investment properties were bought around stations. This was the government's signature policy. Anastasia has been the Premier for 8 years. This is all on her.
Just a quick one, I think you touched on the Coomer connector. What do you make of the shifting timeframes, and what do you anticipate this will mean for motorists?
Thanks, Joel. I'll get our Shadow Minister to deal with that one.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. This is just another example of Mark Bailey's incompetence. We all know with great fanfare prior to the last election that the sods would be turned, the second M1, the Coomer connector, it would be underway. Well, I put it to anyone now. You get stuck on the existing M1 and you've got Mark Bailey to thank for that. This is a project which is years behind in the making and is already hundreds of millions of dollars blown out. And it's very simple. What's the most cost-effective way to get a project done on time? Start on time, finish on time. And this is another example where the rhetoric of the Palaszczuk Labor government does not match up with simple reality. Anyone in southeast Queensland knows that the second M1, the Coomer connector, call it what you want, it had to have started a couple of years ago. But again, Mark Bailey will get up and look at the mirror and say everything's tickety-boo. Will you try and tell that to the people that are stuck on the car park that I call the existing M1? It used to be that you could at least plan, you know what, I might delay it, I might sort of head down to the Gold Coast or come up from the Gold Coast to Brisbane at a certain time to overcome traffic congestion and traffic nightmares. I put it to you now, it doesn't matter what time you leave to head to the Gold Coast or Gold Coast back to Brisbane, it's just flip a coin. That project was needed yesterday. Keep in mind that Minister Mark Bailey has been the Minister now for Main Roads for 8 years. 8 years. Where is the second M1? What has Mark Bailey been doing for 8 years? He is incompetent. He's also asleep at the wheel.
Thank you. Cheers. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.